What is full range of motion to you? Can you like describe that? I mean, I think I have a good idea, but just for the listeners, like, are you talking about always locking the elbows in a bench press? Are you talking about always locking the knees? Those types of things?
That's a really good question. So like to me, full range of motion isn't like a dogmatic or religious concept. It's a concept of, it's like a spectrum concept where there's like, if you do this, that's very low on the full range of motion spectrum. If you do this, it's better. So like, I'm not one of these type of guys that'll look at a guy who touches his, the bar to his chest every time and goes slightly short of lockout and then back and be like, fucking idiot, pussy, he should be locking it out. Like, no, that looks good. Like, that's like a 98% on a test or something. It's not 100 or whatever. But then again, there's some nuance there, right? Like, if you lock out, then maybe it transfers force away from the chest. Maybe now it's more of a tricep exercise. Maybe the triceps become the limiting factor. So maybe locking out 100% isn't a good idea when you're doing chest presses. I have all the time in the world for nuance. There's a very big difference, though, between benching mostly full range and getting a big stretch at the bottom and almost coming up to lockout versus like guys that'll get on the bench just be like, that shit. Like, no, inadmissible. That's just stupid. Right? Like, it's the difference between like a high level chef is supposed to use paprika, but he used like black pepper, and you're like, damn, interesting wine. He's got a good fucking reason for it, even though it's outside of the realm. But if like you watch me cook and I'm like, oatmeal, salt, and you're like, why? Like, don't ask me why. I'm a fucking idiot. I can't cook anything. This is a random guess, I promise. I don't even justify it. So it's one of those where like, full range of motion isn't an absolute concept, but if you're cutting your range of motion, I'd like to know why. So here's another one, right? If you go deep on the leg press, so deep that your hips round out from under you, and now you're hurting in your lower back, it's too fucking deep because it's hurting you, right? But if you go partially on the leg press, and I'm like, have you tried going deeper? They're like, do you feel it more or less in your quads if you go deeper? They're like, more. They're like, but you're not going deeper because they're like, because I can't use as much weight. Shitty, dog shit reason, right? So if you're like, look, if I lock out on the bench, transfer the shit to my triceps, I get less of a pec pump, less of a disruption, my pecs get less sore, and my elbows hurt. Dude, you sold me. Fuck full range of motion. Go as full as you can while getting the good shit for your pecs and not the bad shit for your joints. But the reasoning has to be there. If there's no fucking reasoning and it's clearly obvious that you're fucking lying to yourself, then, you know, especially when guys like, for squats, they make up a ton of reasons. Weightlifters the world over 70 years have been dunking high bar squats and they're fine. And you're like, yeah, man, it doesn't agree with my knees. Shut the fuck up. Don't call yourself an athlete. You just don't know how to lift weights. You're a guy that just does this and you think you know things. Like, go train with weightlifters. They'll show you how to do real weightlifting, and then you can come back and apply it to bodybuilding. So it's one of those things. If you have a good reason, I'm all fucking ears. The problem is most people don't have a good reason. They have no reason at all, other than nut hugging, which is probably not a reason.
I really like how you clarified, first off, when we first started talking about full range of motion and Mark asked that question, you clarified that it could take 6, 8 to 12 months to be able to get to doing like a squat that deep. Because a lot of people immediately, once they see it, they're going to try to squat that low, and then immediately they're either they can't get there with their hips or their knees are hurting down there and they're like, I just don't have the mobility. But you clarified it takes a while to gain that mobility.
Totally. And the more the merrier, as long as it's feeling good for the muscles and feeling okay for the joints. You know, you start at whatever. It's like speaking French. It's not like if you can't speak French perfectly, shut the fuck up and never speak French. Although I guess some French people do think that. But like, you know, like apparently if you go to France and you fuck it up, they're like, do not speak our language, right? But like in reality, it's like, look, whatever French you know, fine. Just try to learn and do a little better. And over time, you speak really good French. Same with like full range of motion. Work on it a little bit. Make sure you're feeling it in the muscles a lot and in the joints a little. Keep going. And over time, you'll get to more of a range of motion, which is great. Like, I'm not looking at motherfuckers doing leg presses and they're going significantly below parallel, but not like as deep as they could. And like, oh, these fucking idiots. I'm like, dude, that's a pretty fucking good leg press. And if they ask me, like, how can I get better? Like, oh, I have tons of ideas, but you're doing a great job. It's a partial credit sort of thing. It's not either or. And it takes time to get to.
You know, and I think that brings us, it's not actually totally different. It's on the same vein. For example, you know, someone can load up a chest supported row and they could load up 5 plates and row that shit, right? But they're not feeling it in their back. They start feeling it in their bicep. They start having to use a lot of body English to bring it back. I'm curious, do you have the same exact thoughts when you see individuals do that type of stuff? And then also, what are some things within training that you'd say That's just fun shit, like drop sets, maybe loading up a lot of weight and just rocking with it. And then what actually does make sense? So within bodybuilding, what are some things that you see a lot of people do, but you're like, that's just fun. It's not really that effective. And then what are some other things that you're like, okay, no, that is legitimate. Like some people go to failure too often, but there is a place for failure towards maybe the end of a set or an end of a workout. Can we clarify some of that stuff?
Yeah, totally. So I think that, we can term something called a mind-muscle connection. And in real training, that doesn't mean like you feel your bicep. It means one of two things, usually both, some measure of both. One, during heavy sets, you feel a disruptive tension, a high degree of tension in your actual bicep or whatever muscle you're training. So if you're doing machine rows, you feel it in your back, like, oh shit. Like someone could be like, do you feel that in your back? You're like, yes, right? And then for higher rep sets, you feel a distinct burn in your back or whatever muscle you're doing. Can you imagine doing chest presses and someone's like, you got to burn? You're like, yep, my triceps are on fire. They're like, what about your pecs? You're like, nope. Like, are we confident that the pecs are being overloaded the most? Like, no, they're not even a limiting factor. That's not really a chest press. You can call it that, but it really is just a tricep press at that point. So the mind-muscle connection is super important to not sacrifice for some other shit. So if you have a movement you're doing with full range of motion, but it reduces the perception of tension to the target muscle, or it reduces the burn, then maybe you should limit your range of motion to whatever gives you the most of that. Funny enough, most of the time when you do true full ROM or fuller ROM, you get gnarly fucking mind-muscle connection anyway. So the two dovetail a ton. Like imagine doing your chest flies and you open up like fucking crazy at the bottom. You squeeze at the top. Like tell me you're not getting a pump and a burn. Get the fuck out of here. Like no, I feel it more like this. No, you fucking don't. Like, you just want to use more weight. Because like we've had tons of people train with us, and when we do the full range of motion shit, they look at us like, dude, my chest is broken. Like no fucking shit. Like there's no mind-muscle connection problem. So for sure, a lot of times when guys are doing that, like load up five plates, like you said, on the row machine, like a lot of times like, putting in work, like, do you feel your back? They're like, I don't really feel much of anything. I'm just trying to survive. If you're just moving weight around, it's cool for strongman. It's fine for powerlifting. It's not bodybuilding anymore. You got to be able to feel some shit, tension to the target muscle or burn in the target muscle. And then after a few sets, you should have a robust pump in the muscle that you're training. If you don't have a pump at all, let's say you're doing rows and you're doing like fucking, pigeon dance row where you like just flail around. And someone's like, you got a pump in your upper back? Like, I got a pump in my lower back and my glutes. It's like, hey, I can tell you what you're training right now and it's not your upper back, because why the fuck doesn't it have a pump? It's like doing curls wrong. Someone's like, do you have a bicep pump? You're like, I have a huge forearm pump. It's like, what do you think you're really training at that point? It's like a hint, it's not your biceps. So there's definitely that factor, and you have to remain true to that, but full range of motion definitely usually helps. And that's one of the exceptions. If you really do have a lift on which the tension and the burn are maximized at a range of motion that is not full or fuller, that's probably a good idea to stay away from full or fuller, right? Like then you have a really good argument and it makes some sense. And as for the fun shit versus effective shit, the good thing, there's like a really wide berth of what's effective in bodybuilding. And here it is. Make sure that the target muscle is being stimulated, number one. Number two, that it is the limiting factor in the set. So for example, if you are doing pull downs without any straps or chalk, and the reason you get 18 reps and not 22 is that you can't hold the bar anymore. Your forearms give out, and someone's like, feeling in your lats, right? You're like, honestly, the reason I quit was because I couldn't hold the bar anymore. Like the lats are not the limiting factor. That means they're actually quite far away from failure as a muscle, and most of the best hypertrophy is seen close to failure, right? Within 3 or 4 reps away from fail. So you have to make sure the target muscle is actually the limiting factor. So the muscle is being stimulated, the target muscle is the limiting factor, and you are, generally speaking, training it hard where you're going relatively close to failure. If you hit all three, there's a lot of right answers to that shit. So if you're doing giant sets or drop sets or myo reps, if you're doing them usually non-randomly, which means you do them every week, you progress through them so that you're doing a little more each time and you're keeping track, that's the best way to do them. And there's a lot of shit that's just good. People are like, when did I do supersets? When should I do my reps? When drop sets? When straight sets? I'm like, is it targeting the muscle? is the muscle the limiting factor? Is it like fatiguing you when you're getting close to failure and afterwards you're like, fuck, that really did some shit? Because if that's the answer, there's a lot of right answers there. So if someone like does a lot of drop sets, my reps, whatever, I'm like, hey, that's great. You know, as long as they can checklist those items and progress logically. And that progress logically is probably an important point, because a lot of times people get so into the fun fuckery of lifting, they don't know if they're progressing. And a lot of times bodybuilding and hypertrophy is complicated. There's a lot of factors coming in. Like in powerlifting, you can tell if you're fucking progressing just because everyone knows what they bench, squat, deadlift. And then like someone's like, hey, are you getting stronger? It's not a fucking mystery. You're like, yes. So they're like, oh, when's your last PR? You're like, I don't know. Like, okay, so when you said you were getting stronger, you're just fucking lying. Like, yes, I haven't gotten stronger in years. But for bodybuilding, a lot of guys do like a different machine every time, or different range of motion every time, or different, like, you know, they did straight sets last week. Now they're doing drop sets. You ask them like, hey, it's like, are you getting stronger for reps? And they can't actually give you a reliable answer, which is why consistency is a really good idea. Like, dude, do all the fun shit you want, except do the same kind of fun shit and just progress a little bit each week or each session. And then you can tell, like, dude, over the last 2 months, these like drop sets on leg press, I went from doing 500, 400, 300 for sets of 10, 10, 10 to 550, 450, 350 for 12, 12, 12. Like, some shit had to have happened. Like, my 99 problems, but training progression is not one of them. Because in bodybuilding too is high volume. It's really easy to trick yourself into thinking you're working harder and harder. But really, because the shit is so hard, it's easy to start coddling yourself. I'll tell you this, like, so for example, you're doing skull crusher super heavy or JM presses. You get to a point, if you have strong triceps, where like, yeah, 135 feels like it gets you a good pump and shit, but what you need is like 185 and 190 and 195. That's what really makes your triceps grow the most. You don't want to do that shit. It feels fucking weird. It takes 15 minutes to warm up for it. You got to put on elbow sleeves. You're like, why the fuck am I doing this? Like, let me just train a little easier and justify it with some weird shit. But that's not the way to really make those fucking gains. The way to guarantee gains is to do shit that works and make sure you do a little bit harder every single time or on average. Then there's no like, it's like a quick jiu-jitsu analogy. If you roll with different guys all the time and you don't keep track of points or anything in your head at least, or like what sweeps you're getting, like, like someone's like, are you getting better? You're like, yeah, I feel good. How do you know you're getting better? Like, you roll against the same good guys in your crew and you're starting to fucking sub more people. You're giving the black belts problems. It's the same guys and you're going up against you, trying the same sweep. You start getting it. Then you're like, oh, yeah, no, I am getting better. This is fucking sweet. You don't have to ask yourself like, man, maybe I've just been lying to myself and going and shitting on blue belts and white belts and pretending I'm getting better. Same idea. There's got to be some kind of like, a lot of guys want to get real fancy and do all kinds of weird shit. They don't want that, like, the oppression of a fucking plan. And it is oppressive. Like, you're like, okay, last week we did leg press for sets of 20. This week we do leg press again for sets of 20, except with 10 more pounds. You look at your logbook, right? And you're like, I have to beat this? Fuck that. But that's that real shit that guarantees gains. You're like, man, let's just do leg extension. Let's do hack squat. I feel it more. Lie to yourself. Fuck that. 10 more fucking pounds this week. The week after, 10 fucking more pounds. You're not going to want to do it. Your fatigue is crazy high. Fuck that. But that's the shit that guarantees you progress. So yeah, there's tons of the right answers to what works. Do similar shit for 1 month, 2 months. Build it up like crazy until you just can't anymore. Deload, pick some different shit. Keep that shit and then go up again.